I'm going to explain why I do not believe that Michael Jackson was a pedophile. Now, obviously, Michael Jackson, he was a very famous entertainer. He died in, I think it was 2009 or something, somewhere around that time. And he was accused of being a pedophile. I think around in the 1990s, there were basically two allegations that I'm aware of. There was an allegation of a boy saying he molested him in the 1990s, and then there was another allegation in the 2000s. And the first allegation did not go to trial. The second allegation did go to trial, and Michael Jackson was acquitted of the charges. Now see, and so what happened was this: after the first allegation came out, the whole thing about Michael Jackson being a pedophile, it became a joke, or it became something that a lot of people said that he was a pedophile, and comedians made jokes about it, and they talked about it on TV and all that stuff. Now, but I don't believe those allegations, and I'm going to explain why. Now, first of all, the allegation was Michael Jackson molested some boys who were kind of pubescent type boys, 12, 13 years old, around that age. And if you look at statistically, men who molest unrelated pubescent boys or unrelated boys, they are statistically the most prolific types of sex offenders, some of the most prolific types of sex offenders. So typically, when you see a case like this, when you see a man who molests some 12-year-old boy who is not related to him, usually those men have a large number of victims. Now, if we look at Michael Jackson's life, Michael Jackson was around, he had a lot of money, he was famous, he had children around him all the time, he had his whole ranch, children were coming in and out of there all the time, and so he had access to all these children for a long time, since he was a teenager, okay? And so since he was a teenager until he died, I think he was maybe around 50 when he died. So from, let's say, 15 to 50 years old, he has all this unlimited access to young boys. And so you would think that if he was a pedophile, you would expect there to be a large number of victims based on the behavior that you see from the general behavior, the typical behavior that you see from other pedophiles, okay? That you see from people who are confirmed pedophiles. If you can look at a lot of cases. There's a lot of cases that you can look up. I don't know all of these cases, but every time I hear about these cases, for example, there was an American teacher who taught an international teacher. He went to a whole bunch of different countries, and he used to drug boys and molest them and video and tape it, and then he had all these pictures or videos or whatever of his crimes. So he taught I think he was taught in Indonesia, in Central America, Britain. He taught in all these places, and in the United States when he was young, I can't remember how old, maybe a teenager, maybe in his 20s, he got charged with molesting boys. Okay, like molesting 12, 13-year-olds. Then afterwards, he became this international teacher, and he taught in all these places, and he kept molesting boys. Everywhere he went, he was molesting these boys, the students. You take them out on field trips, drug them, molest them, videotape it. And what happened was, I think some maid or something found his electronic devices, went through it, or stole his electronic devices, and then went through it, found all these pictures of him molesting these boys, and then went to the authorities. And then he got arrested, and he committed suicide. And I think he probably had a wife or kids, maybe. I'm not sure if he had kids. I think he had a wife, but anyway, he got caught. He committed suicide. Okay, then you had there's so many cases. You have priests that have been caught with this stuff, and once again you see them with a lot of victims. There's a guy in Southeast Asia who got caught, who was a Canadian guy. He got caught. There was Jerry Sandusky. He was another one. Jerry Sandusky from Penn State University, the football coach, aka aka gay pederastic penetration state university. He had a huge number of victims. He was, and they finally arrested him. They were covering up for him for a long time. Joe Paterno and the university authorities and teachers and all kinds of people were covering up for him. People were catching him raping boys in the shower. He was raping boys while his wife was in another room. She probably knew about it, but didn't say anything. So there are all these victims. Like, most of these people have all these victims, but then you have Michael Jackson, who's been around children for such a long time of his life, and there's only 2 allegations that came out about him, even though throughout the media they have all this stuff in the media talking about Michael Jackson's a pedophile and joking about him being a pedophile and portraying him as a pedophile. But then where's the victims? There's only 2 victims come forward, and these people, Michael Jackson's rich. They even had tabloids offering boys who had been around Michael Jackson, trying to pay them money to say they've been molested, and the boys wouldn't say they've been molested because they just said it didn't happen. So we can't say it happened because it didn't happen. So you have this person who had so many opportunities to molest children, and there's only 2 allegations. If Michael Jackson had been a pedophile and he had all this access to children for so long, there would have been hundreds of victims. I guarantee that there would have. I'm fairly certain that there would have been hundreds of victims if he had been a real pedophile. And so my question is, where are all these victims? Now, the first alleged victim came out in the 90s, and I think those people, the boy and his family, were after money from Michael Jackson, in my opinion. This is what I think happened. I think they were after money from him, and Michael Jackson did not want to be embarrassed. He didn't want the embarrassment of going to trial and all this kinds of stuff, and them coming out and talking, so that he just paid them off because he had a lot of money, so he didn't mind just paying them to go away. And but to me, in my opinion, is if something really happened, if somebody commits a crime against you, why would you just take money instead of, that's a criminal issue, so why would you just take the money and not go to trial? Like, if somebody committed a sexual crime, why would somebody just want to take the money and not go to trial? So to me, that story seems kind of fishy for that reason. They're not this, it's like they didn't have it was like they didn't have a proper criminal case, but they were able to intimidate or extort Michael Jackson to get money out of him, because he didn't want the trial. He didn't want the embarrassment of all this negative publicity and all this embarrassment and stuff like that. So that's why I think he paid them off. And then you had, in the 2000s, you had another allegation against him, and that case did go to trial. They had the evidence came out, and the evidence was very weak. That's why he was acquitted of the charges, because the story of the case that they had against him did not make sense. The story of the prosecutor and the story of the alleged victim or victims, I can't remember if it was one victim or 2 victims, but 2 alleged victims. And the other thing is, the mother of those boys, the mother had been already charged or already accused of trying to scam some store out of money. She had the boys, or I think she made up some story to get money out of a store, some fake story. So these people, they're scam. It sounds like this was a family of scammers. The mother was a scammer, and she had the boys following following behind her, following in her footsteps, running scams, trying to get money out of Michael Jackson. So that's my opinion. So how could you, if Michael Jackson had been really molesting children and all that stuff, why would there not be, why would you only have 2 allegations against him? There should be hundreds of allegations, because if you look at those other cases of pederastic pedophiles, from Jerry Sandusky, that American international teacher guy. There's been coaches, all kinds of different coaches. Like in Canada, there was a hockey coach who was molesting boys, priests, all these people who have been molesting boys. They have so many victims. They have hundreds of victims. And then you have Michael Jackson, who's been around children for such a long time, since he was a teenager. And where are all the victims? That it doesn't make any sense for there not to be a lot of victims. And why, if they were victims, why would the victims not come forward? Look at people like Jimmy Saville in Britain. This guy, when he died, all these victims came forward. Why would victims not come forward in Michael Jackson's case? So that doesn't make sense to me. So that leads me to conclude that these allegations are not truthful, or were not truthful, or these accusations against Michael Jackson were not true, because if they were true, there should be a lot of victims, and there's no victims coming forward. So obviously these allegations are not valid, most likely not valid, most likely not true. So that's why I believe that Michael Jackson was not guilty of the things that they said he did. So that's my opinion. I also think that Michael Jackson was a scapegoat in the media at that time. So the media was kind of pointing a finger at Michael Jackson and distracting people, taking people's attention away from things that were actually happening, that were more important than that. And like I said, Michael Jackson, the evidence suggests that Michael Jackson didn't do anything. There's no evidence that he did anything. And then you have there's people in the entertainment industry who are really actually had a lot of evidence of them really being molesting kids. Like, for example, there's a movie director who he got convicted, charged and convicted of molesting a boy, and he was someone who has been directing children's movies. I think he's still directing children's movies now for Disney or whatever. Some of these big companies, they haven't been talking about him. They didn't talk about him. The media didn't talk about him. And there was another guy. There was a guy who was managing boy bands. He was another one. I can't remember his name. Some fat guy. He got convicted for molesting boys. So the media doesn't talk about those guys, but they're talking about Michael Jackson, where they have no evidence that he did anything. They're just, they're talking blah blah blah, acting like he did something, but there's no evidence. And the people, I would listen to people that actually knew something, like boys who were around Michael Jackson. If they were coming out and saying they got molested by Michael Jackson, I would believe them. But if you have some news anchors or some, these talking heads, these people don't know anything. They weren't there. They weren't at the situation. They weren't around that. So how would they know? They have no credibility to talk about what they're talking about. So basically, that whole Michael Jackson thing, it was a big distraction, a big red herring. They weren't talking about real. They were ignoring real pedophiles. It's like they're putting up a smoke screen, so to hide all the other things that they were doing, all the other things that were really going on, just putting up the scapegoat, Michael Jackson.